本当？見えないでしょ？どこにいるのかな？全然見えないよ。What's good, Internet? It's Tuesday, May 12th, and you're listening to Waypoint Radio, episode 313. I'm your host, Austin Walker. I am joined today, once again, by Geeta Jackson.
Hello, I'm here.
You're
How's
back.
it going?
Also
Yes.
joining us, Ricardo Contreras. Kato, how are you?
Good. Extra day off this week. It was nice.
That's true. We had off yesterday, which doesn't.
Which is why
I mean,
you're
I
hearing
still
this
just
on a
work.
Tuesday.
Yeah, exactly, yes. And Rob Zachney, also, as always, is here with us. How you doing, Rob?
Not too bad. My allergies have finally hit critical mass, and so the answer is I'm doing terribly. I feel absolute crap.
Good.
But in terms of how are things overall in the scheme of things, they're fine.
Oh, okay, yeah. The overall is fine. It's just the allergies that are really killing you.
Yeah,
right
I'm
now.
just having fantasies of doing the end of pi thing where I just send a drill into my sinus cavity and be like, that would fix everything forever.
Let me just open up a hole in here and just let it all out.
Yeah.
Totally. It's fantastic. We are recording on a Tuesday, and we're recording on a Tuesday where we don't really have, not as many games to play. I've been busy this weekend working on some side project stuff. I just submitted the final chapter of my new day comic that I'm writing with Evan Narcissus. Woo! So that's been what my few days have been mostly. I've played some Valorant in there. I played some Fallout 76 still. I'll talk about that stuff, I think, maybe on Friday. But I'm curious, before we get into what the real focal point here is, which is the question bucket, the dreaded question bucket episode that we have been threatening now for a number of weeks is here. Is there anything anyone wants to shout out before we go diving into the piles of the questions that folks sent in? Any games that deserve a little 2 to 3 minute, hey, that's a good one. This is a new segment. We have to call it, hey, that's a good one.
That's a good one.
Can we get a Seinfeld-esque staying with a lot of slap
Yeah.
bangs in there?
Oh, you know what?
Well,
The real thing we need to do is in this moment say rip to Jerry Stiller, comedic king.
Oh man, that was a lot. Honestly,
Yeah.
my boyfriend showed me not too long ago an Israeli Sesame Street sort of spin-off special that he had done, where he was teaching children the Israeli alphabet with sort of a telethon theme. It was in the 90s when telethons were a huge thing. So it was Jerry Stiller hosting, and people would call in and ask about different letters of the Israeli alphabet. Call in, It's super cute.
That's very funny. I should go visit the Costanza house once this is all done. It's in my neighborhood. It's in Astoria. It's far from me, but it's in Astoria. I could make that walk and pay my respects, as I think all New Yorkers ought.
A pilgrimage, truly.
So yeah, anyone want to shout anything out that they've been playing?
Honestly, I just started playing Apex Legends again, and I opened up my browser to buy the battle pass for the new season
Hell yeah.
starting today.
Hell
I'm
yeah.
having so much fun with this game. I forget
game is
every
good.
time.
It's so good.
It's so good. Respawn is so good.
Have you picked up Loba, the new character? Have you seen what her abilities are?
She comes today.
Or she starts today. Okay.
Yeah, so her abilities, so I checked back in, and the storytelling that's going on between this season, the last season that just ended, and the season that starts now, is they've sort of joined them, blended them together. Compared to games like Overwatch, well, the only game you can compare it to that also has a story-based, a story and character-based shooter, the way that they disseminate lore is just so much more interesting.
Yeah.
So the new character introduced last season was called Revenant, and he was introduced. They faked out fans. They added some character assets to the code to fake out data miners, and we're our new hero is Forge. Forge is our new guy. He's from Hammond Robotics. He's this half robot man. He's a boxer style guy. He's the new guy, and data miners bought it. And then in the last preview of Hammond, they were doing these animated interview feature things. Another character comes out and stabs him through the back of the chest, in a back, with blood splaying everywhere. And that character is dead, and that was our actual new hero, Revenant, who is the guy who was taken by Hammond Robotics. As I'm saying, because Austin is
I'm a Titanfall lore guy, of course. Yeah.
Yeah.
Of course. Yeah.
So I know that you get
I know
it.
about Hammond Robotics. Listen, yeah.
So Hammond Robotics took this man. Hammond Robotics is CD Robotics company and the awful corporate overlords.
They're allied with the IMC, obviously, et cetera,
Obviously. I went back and read a whole bunch of Titanfall lore because the lore in Apex is so good that it made me want more, and they're set in the same world. He was once a man, but he's been turned into a simulacrum, which I think those were introduced in Titanfall 2. There's only one other that we've seen, and they're from a different electronics company. Anyway, this is just for the the
lore. This is welcome to Titanfall lore reasons, Apex Legends lore reasons.
Yeah.
They're like robot. They're like fully robot bot. They're like the Major from Ghost in the Shell. They're fully robotic bodies with human minds in them.
Yeah,
I believe.
So
I believe.
His like official trailer was him assassinating a family in a restaurant, and the daughter survived. And the sting on the end of that trailer was the daughter sort of looking up and looking at the camera. And that character is Loba. And her mission, her character motivation is to kill Revenant, who is unkillable because he's a machine right now.
Right,
So
who downloads his brain into new bodies when his current body blows up.
Yeah.
And also all his abilities are about like his ult is basically that he can put down a thing in combat that is like a res stone basically, where he can put down the stone and then go get into a gunfight, and then if he dies he teleports back to the revival stone. That's the type of dude he is.
His regular ability is a bitch when you run into it. It's like a very effective counter to Bloodhound, which is what I've been playing recently, where I saw a Revenant. He immediately hit me with his ability, which made sure I couldn't use my ability.
Yeah,
so
he has
just immediately tell everyone where everyone was.
He has like a grenade that shuts down other people's abilities, which is fucked up and sick.
It's fucked up. When you run into him, it's really like, oh shit, it's a Revenant. Like, it's just because he's not honestly, like, his hitbox stuff and it's not awesome. And the crouch run shit is okay. But when he hits you with that ability, it just means that you're in a regular shooter again. And you have to actually shoot people. Shoot
the guns. Rob, you seem like you had a question.
Well, first of all, this trailer's hard as hell. Holy
I know.
shit!
Yeah, right?
Holy shit!
The trailer's so good.
It's like, what if Into the Spider-Verse just had people getting snuffed every 30 seconds?
It's sick. It's wild.
But also,
so amazing.
So, are we sure Revenant's the bad guy here? Because everyone here looks like a 1%er or like a bodyguard of a 1%er.
Well, no, because this is
and there are restaurants and boardrooms that I would send Revenant into, no problem.
Well, this is the thing, right? It's like he was literally an assassin whose body was owned by this corporation, who was forced to kill people for this corporation, who then it seems like has turned on the society that built him and turned him into this monstrous killing machine, right?
So he discovered that the people that turned him to a machine died over 200 years ago. So now he's just claimed revenge on the entire human race.
Right.
Wait, he just turned into smoke.
Yeah, dog.
Oh no.
Revenant sick.
Oh no.
Yeah.
Ooh.
I can't believe Respawn made me care about a character so edgy. There's a moment you'll see
he's
looking
such an
into the
edgelord.
glass. He's so edgy, but there's a moment where he looks into the mirror and he sees the man he used to be, and I was like, fuck, you got me. I got by basic storytelling techniques.
Fuck.
Yeah.
And, I think that there is you can definitely bring in a disability criticism angle here and talk about okay, can we stop just associating using mechanization and prosthetics as a way to dehumanize someone. But I actually the thing that I think that they're trying to do here is to just very functionally be here is a dude who was turned into a machine by the machine of capitalism, of just this is how he always was. He was always this already. And what's being revealed is that even before he was put in this machine body, even before he was stuck in this loop for 200 years, he had been turned into this thing. And yes, as you're building to, Gita, the little girl gets away. The daughter is put in an elevator and sent away. and now
So-
she's back.
Rob, the trailer you want to watch immediately after the season 4 trailer is the season 5 trailer. Loba Andrade, she's grown up. She's back. She's trained herself to be a thief because she knows she needs to sneak into the Hammond facilities and shoot his old head in the head. And so all of her abilities are shooting his old head in the head.
Down with old
old
Some
head.
Vigo the Carpathian
He's got a
shit.
new
It's
head
fucking
now.
rules.
Yeah.
Yeah. But what if you shoot his original head? What if she wants to take his head off?
There has to be an head.
Yeah.
Head.
Off. I'm linking you this the
Everyone's
second
doing
trailer
this.
now.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're all doing the face off motion because we have to, because that's the rule.
So all of her abilities are based around thievery. So basically,
this is
she's
cool.
just a loot detector,
Yeah.
which is going to be so much fun to play around with. We'll have to see, of course, now that she's actually in play, about to be in play, what it's like to play with her in a team, how useful that actually is.
She has like a teleport. She has like a grenade type thing that she can throw extremely far. It looks like that lets her teleport. It's like a a teleportation disc or whatever. It's like a bracelet is what it is, which is sick.
Yeah.
And then what? She has like
rules.
loot vision basically,
Yeah,
which
I
lets
think
her
that's her
see.
passive.
And then her ult is incredible. Like in all of the trailers, she has been using this cane that she has, this like walking stick thing. That's just like it's just like made to look her. It's just made to make her look like she's incredibly cool and a daring like gentleman thief, basically. And what it does is she can slam it into the ground and it vacuums up all of the loot in an area and puts it into her marketplace, which lets her teammates just like quickly grab it from a menu, a single menu, instead of going around and looting an entire area. And in a game where like quickly looting up can really help your pace, that seems incredible. So, I mean, it's not great out the gate because, they're not going to have an ult for your very first location. But if you get an ultimate accelerant, which is the thing that speeds up your ult, or you get into a good fight, whatever it is, like you could end up by your second or third like location being able to get that little extra speed boost from being able to quickly loot everything around.
What I really like about these characters too is that they seem designed intentionally with the community in mind and not just what the developers think would be cool. Having an ability that stops other people's abilities is absolutely like it's a counter to the characters that have become the most popular and the most usable, like especially Wraith and Bloodhound, where you're just kind of popping their abilities literally all the time. And then also like Loba in a game that like is about collecting loot, having a character that can just suck up all the loot is like incredibly useful, and also speaks to how people play the game, where you spend hopefully the first couple of minutes going from place to place and just completely scouring literally everything that's available and putting it in your hands. So I'm excited to try her out. I got to buy the battle pass right now.
Yeah, I'm gonna buy it too. I'm gonna dive back in. There's also map changes and some other stuff. There's a horde mode being added, which is really interesting. Right now, it's kind of tied. Let's talk about it on Friday because I have some questions about the actual implementation of it and the way that it will be. Because right now, it seems like it's tied to. So it's basically tied to a drop you can get in the real game, in the regular game, not the real game, the regular competitive mode. Basically, doesn't unlock the horde mode. I think it unlocks the ability for the horde mode to give you rewards, but I'm not 100% sure on any of that, and so I'm going to wait. I'm excited to play it. I'm going to try to play some this week, and we can talk about it on Friday.
Yeah, I'm definitely going to play more. Every time I drop back into this game, I have more fun. Yeah. And the other thing I've been doing is I played it and I was like, I wish I was better at shooters because I'm not super good at shooters, especially on PC. I just don't play them a lot. And then one of my teammates was like, you should try an aim trainer. And I was like, I should try an aim trainer. So yesterday, I spent like an hour with Kovacs, and I think I'm actually, one, not as bad at shooters as I thought I was. And
Nice.
two, I think I've definitely gotten better.
It helps. So I haven't done an aim trainer, but I've been playing a different aim trainer that I know, Kata, you've been playing too, called Valorant. Which has resuscitated my keyboard and mouse gameplay shooter skills. But I haven't used them since. I realized that the last Counter-Strike-like game I played was probably a decade ago, and it was a CS-style cyberpunk, lightly themed cyberpunk source mod called Neo Tokyo, which is incredible and has like an incredible. That soundtrack is like that Ed Harrison soundtrack. That is first all time, dude. It's incredible. God bless you, Rob Zachney, for being with me on this one. It's so good, and
that was the thing that made me create a Bandcamp account. Back
yeah, me too.
I was like, where do I get this? Is this okay? I don't know what this service is, but I must have it.
Yes, people should go listen to the Ed Harrison Neo Tokyo soundtrack. There's actually multiple at this point, and that game is good. But like even then, I didn't. That was a mod with a small scene by the time I got to it, and so there were not like guides online. I was not playing with a tight community on voice chat, etc. And so now with Valorant, like being able to play with people has meant that I'm able to just like focus in on getting better at that game, and seeing noticeable change has been very, very funny. I was so bad at Valorant the first week it came out, or the first week that I got a code, and now I'm like going 29 and 20, which is not like the best KDA of all time, but like, damn, that's all right.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, and not every game. Some games I'm going, 8 and 18 when I'm against really good people. But those 29 and 20 games ain't bad. So, you're still keeping up with Okada?
Yeah, totally. I've been playing a lot of solo competitive, which is all right. I feel like it's better than solo unranked so far still, but
that makes sense. Yeah.
It's weird. You still get the random people who are like technically higher rank than you that are still trying to play deathmatch, it seems, and they're like, well, you're not playing deathmatch good enough for this objective based game. It's like, well, you obviously got into a higher rank in a different way than I am I climbed an entire rank. I'm very proud of myself, but
nice.
It's an interesting space that I think so far has been not as toxic as I expected, because
the unranked stuff is a mess. I will say in terms of
sure.
I have not played, so I've not done solo queue ranked much outside of my ranking games, basically.
Mm-hmm.
But the unranked casual stuff, it has been. I don't want to play that game without my friends, because I know I'm going to get someone who calls me one of a kind of menu of slurs they have available.
Mm-hmm.
Which that's on society's fault and that person's fault, not on Riot necessarily. But I hope that they take there's like a pretty broad reporting system in place and stuff.
Yeah.
But I'm still running into it. It still happens all the time. Right. So
that's definitely something that it's in every game. It depends on what the Riot response will ultimately be, and whether or not they change the reporting or right now it's pretty good. There's like a menu of like different specific things that include verbal abuse and harassment,
and hate speech, and it's like they have it pretty well sub-defined. So we'll see.
Waiting on seeing their response to that has been the thing that's been keeping me from jumping into it with both feet. I want to play Valorant
totally fair.
Because I'm interested. I think character based is the way for me to get into shooters in general. For some reason that's the hook for me. So I wanted to try Valorant, especially hearing that it's more technical and being interested in working on my technical skills. But when people get obsessed with being technically skilled, they just tend to be mean. And I was waiting for the game to be nice.
Yeah. So still playing that. Happy to play it with a group, having fun with that too. All right. With that said, do we want to dive into the question bucket? It's time. I feel like it is. I have new questions. I also have some very old questions. I have OG question bucket questions in front of me on top of stuff people have sent in. Do y'all want to go old or new first, and then I'll start rotating?
Well, now I'm really curious. Like, what's some old shit? Like,
you want some old shit?
Some aesthetic quality.
Tell me the old shit.
All right, here's a fun one. Let's see here. All right. Rhodes writes in and says, my friends and I have started a conversational video game podcast, and I struggle with having meaningful things to say. The show is still finding its groove, but I'm often baffled at some of the stuff that comes out of my mouth when I'm trying to say things other than it's good, it's interesting, or it feels good. I want to describe the aspects I like rather than call it a positive experience. We're inspired by Waypoint's Why We Play motif, a thing that existed once, but it's weirdly difficult to understand why we feel a certain way. For me, our show ends up helping me understand why I feel the way I do because I'm forced to talk about it. It's usually a long, rambling journey to get there. I'd like to be more prepared going in. I guess my question is, do you ever feel silly after the things you say on a podcast? As a fan of your site and show, I never think you're being unreasonable or thoughtless, even if I disagree. Do you have any tips for talking about games without being reductive, or is this just something that comes with time? Thanks, and sorry for the long email, Rhodes. I feel silly all the fucking time.
Every episode.
I feel stupid pretty much every time I talk.
I'll say that I think that there are good episodes and bad episodes. I leave the table feeling different every recording. Like there is not I'm not someone who's like, I mean, I think our batting average is pretty good, all set, right? Like I'm happy with the show. But of course there are days when I would leave it and go like, man, that fucking sucked. Man, what was I even saying?
Yeah.
You just talk sometimes. There was Rob, do we want to do you want to make some public beef about a podcast that will never get back to that podcast?
Sure.
So Rob, you've been sending me clips.
Oh no! Oh, we're doing this one. Oh shit!
Well, only because it's going to, only because it reflects.
I was wondering if we were ever going to talk about this.
The truth of me and my feeling about myself in podcasts, also, which is that there is what's the name of that podcast? Do you know what they're called?
Way Down in the Hole.
Sure, Way Down in the Hole.
Of course.
The Ringers podcast about The Wire. Which is what Jamel Hill and Van Lathan.
I don't know. Yep.
Yeah, I don't know. I've read Van's byline. I don't know how to pronounce his last name. The clips you've sent me of that podcast are bad. There's stuff that is just like high level. There's stuff that is just this is the text being described as if it's high level analysis.
Okay, I just have to give you some to the listeners at home.
Yes, please.
Why is this coming up? Because for weeks I have been addicted to seeing the social cells of this podcast going up on Twitter as the Ringer posts them, and they're all pretty bad. And these are and the thing about these cells is this is stuff
social cells, what you mean is video clips of the two hosts talking.
Yeah. This is stuff that generally you won't put your bangers out there, right? When Kato makes these, Kato's always trying to figure out what are the parts of the podcast to excerpt? What are the things that we're going to showcase to people who maybe don't regularly listen, but this will give them a sense of what the content of the discussion was, or ideally entice them to become listeners. So you expect this to be sort of like the A material. I've been fascinated, luridly so, by how dismal these clips are about a show that I did not think it was possible to be boring about. The Wire is a really rich and rewarding text, and there's a lot to get into. At any point, I could start talking about that show with any number of friends and probably have a good conversation with a lot of things to say. The achievement of Way Down in the Hole is that it appears that at the podcast's very best, there is absolutely nothing to say. And I'm kind of fascinated by the ways that the podcast ends up stumbling toward, it feels like two people kind of realizing, one, it's almost like a naive reading of The Wire. I'm kind of fascinated by that. It's you didn't actually think very much about what you would say. This is clearly kind of a very cold take on the show because it's sort of like having this conversation for the first time.
Do the conversations just kind of sum up to Wire good?
Yeah.
No.
Well,
no.
Okay.
They're
different opinions.
They kind of sum Austin, I would say they kind of sum up to here, that's a thing that happened in The Wire.
Okay,
that is also a thing that happened in The Wire.
So it's not even an assessment.
No, it's
of
not
The Wire.
it's not like this sequence was good or this character is. It is summary, but to me, they're using summary as superlative. Do you know what I mean?
Oh, yes. That's how, I've been thinking about this a lot because I watch this horror movie YouTuber, Ryan Hollinger. He's just this Irish guy that, clearly, works in the film industry in some capacity and loves movies. And I like him so much because he is one of the rare, movie-oriented YouTubers on the platform that doesn't do exactly that treats summary as either a discussion of the themes or as a superlative. He actually talks about the content of movies and what shots look like, and it's refreshing because everything else is just exactly what you're describing.
Well, I think this is what at our best we would try to shoot for with Be Good and Rewatch It as well. But it's also when we get when we do deep dives on show topics. But Austin, to your point.
to my point, the thing that ends up happening in the most recent clip you sent me is that Van Lathan does a summary of a sequence, talks about how specifically the character of Johnny drags the character of Bubbles back into a tenuous situation after Bubbles has seemingly gotten his life together. And that part, I have no... There should have been a deeper reading into what's happening there to some degree, because what's happening there is just here's the text of the show. The thing that I have lots of sympathy for is what Jamel Hill does after that, which is she has been... Van Lathan has lobbed her a pass, and she has to now like run with it. And what she does is just starts talking. And the reason I say I have lots of sympathy for that is because the job of doing a podcast is to just keep talking. And what she ends up doing is, to my eyes, I was going to say untrained eyes, but actually to my eyes, as someone who this is my job, does something that is very easy to fall into, which is you go, okay, I have to find a point. Okay, I have to find a thesis. What the fuck am I saying? Okay, that's what Bubs is trying to do, right? And Johnny is the opposite. It's like they're opposites. They're like inverted from each other. Let me commit to that. That's the point I'm going to make now. And da-da-da-da-da-da-da. And you're a sophist. Like, to some degree, podcasting is sophistry. You learn the rhetoric and the cadence of having a good point. And good podcasting is only doing that when you have a good point. Good podcasting is saving that and putting it in your back pocket so that when you bring it, and like, you go listen to podcasts with this in mind, and you will start hearing from lots of people that they don't know how to separate those two things. I think I've gotten better at it over the years. And really the important thing for me is I've decided to only get in that mode when I'm truly enthusiastic about something, including a take where I'm mad or angry, not just when I'm enthusiastic and want to sing something's praises, but like when I like truly feel like it, I want to get into that mode. Otherwise, I do my best to just like hit the brakes and be like, if I have to sound like I don't know what I'm talking about here, let me at least sound like I don't know what I'm talking about here. Let me not pretend like I know what I'm talking about and then later really kick myself for making it sound like I've committed to a bad take. Historically, you can point to many instances in the past years of the show where that's happened, and I've been like, "Ah, fuck. Well, okay, here it is." And so yeah, I think you definitely leave a podcast sometimes feeling silly or feeling goofy or feeling like it was a bad one, feeling like you just don't click. It's like basketball. You know what I mean? There's whatever, 80 games a season, and no one gets 80 out of 80. And the worst thing that I can hear as a podcaster from a fan is like you have a perfect record. It's like when you're not listening. I appreciate your support. I'm happy to hear that you're getting something out of it. It's very nice and kind of you, but I am blowing it out there this season. And what I need from you is like, not you'll get them next time. I just need you to be like, hey, I like your show a lot. That's all. That's good.
That's nice.
Anyway.
I will say as a woman, sometimes it's a little bit different where I will hear myself say something stupid and then I just immediately think, I'm so glad that I don't have to read the emails for this show, because the criticism you get when you have a voice that sounds feminine on a podcast is different. One, for some reason, everyone always wants to tell you how to do your audio setup, and I don't know why that's the thing they want to tell you. Regardless of your ability to do those things, they just tell you what you should do. And two, like every single, I remember I clearly and obviously misspoke in this podcast I used to have with this guy called Patrick Klepek. I don't know if you know him, but
Klepak.
I don't know.
I think it's Klepak. I'm pretty sure.
He's like a YouTuber, right?
Yeah, he's a YouTuber.
You're always in that Jamel Hill. Like, what do I do with this?
Exactly. I would say that the big thing about that Patrick guy is he just does not know how to tie a conversation together or like build rapport with multiple people and glue a kind of loose group of miscreants together in a way.
He's not an accomplished conversationalist or an incredibly warm and empathetic.
Wouldn't call him a journalist.
No, absolutely not. No, not an accomplished, reporter and journalist with a huge pedigree. But yeah, remember one time I misspoke and called something turn-based strategy when it was real-time strategy. And it was clearly me misspeaking. But it was
exactly as Gita's Twitter mentions.
Yeah. And it was just like, it clearly and obviously me in the heat of a conversation saying the wrong thing by accident. And then just like people were like, did you know that you said that? Did you know that you said that? And it's like, well, I guess, man. Like, have you ever had a conversation before? Sometimes you say the wrong shit. Like, you can't be on the ball 100% of the time. And a lot of my, like, a thing with my journey to podcasting has been, like, forgiving myself for when I know I've said something dumb that is now committed to record. And either doing the thing where I jump back in and I explain it better, or I just feel like maybe that's what I actually feel, and maybe it's a little bit silly, and maybe I just need to be honest about it and be happy that I don't have to read whatever mad emails that come through about this comment.
See, now I have to apologize to Austin, though, because Austin didn't want to, like, beef that hard with the Ringer podcast.
No, we're good.
Like, I'm like, you got me on the subject. Like, I hate it. I hate it so much.
I know you
can't look away.
I know.
Every time.
I mean, this is the thing. We are now doing, I was going to joke before when Gita was talking that, like, there's the Kanye line, I'm on TV talking like it's just you and me, which is how we podcast sometimes, where it is just like, oh, this is a conversation. I think the podcast is at its best when it's not just that. I think the podcast at its best is when we evoke that, but have done the legwork ahead of recording to be buttoned up. I've said about art because this is just a thing that gets taught about art and fiction, is that good fiction often is able to evoke the truth of an emotional, like an emotional truth that would not be available for you inside of that emotion to represent or enunciate. That, like, this is like the classic one, is that, like, Hamlet filled with grief is way more articulate on the nature of grief than anyone who is suffering and grieving in the moment, right? And this is one of the things that makes fiction so good. Good podcasts are similar in that we've taken notes. I've been thinking about a thing all week, and then you dress it up in, like, you know, a t-shirt and make it feel like you're just, like, over at our house and we're, like, playing a game and shooting the shit and are, like, stumbling into the most interesting conversations you've ever heard. It's like, no, we're not stumbling into them. Like, we seeded this all week. We didn't, like, script it, but it's clear. It was like, oh yeah, I'm going to save this to talk about it. Hey, have you played this thing? Hey, can you play this thing? Hey, did you watch this? Hey, when you're really on your game, Rob, like, you'll send around notes for when we were doing waypoints, like, there was an entire rundown sheet that was like, here are touchstones, here are sources. We all, like, contributed to it. Like, here are things I read this week that were really interesting and that tie into this, so that we can naturally throw to each other. We can build, like, and so all that stuff also, I think, maybe helps answer the question, Rhodes, of, like, how do you do that next step is to do it. You got to do it. You have to do the legwork on it, at least until you've built out that skill set of being able to do a quick take on something that isn't trash. And that's hard. Like, it's hard. I love going to a PAX for that reason, because, like, all right, I saw a thing today. In 2 hours, I have to have a take that's interesting, not just on a microphone, but in front of 200 to 300 people. Kato, it sounded like you had something.
No.
Unless I misheard. Okay,
no, I think I misheard.
There it is.
I will say, like, I think the thing that can be really deceptive about all of this is, like, as you just alluded to, Austin, there is a trade-off between having a podcast that sounds that way. You're increasing the amount of back-end labor when you're doing that kind of show prep. You can also really increase it if you say to, like, your producer, like we told Kato, like, Kato, look, if we're not like just nailing it, cut it. Just like we'll redo segments until we sound fucking awesome. And you will have now now it will take you 12, 20 hours to produce one episode of this podcast, but we will sound incredible. But that will also be a lie, right? Like, to an extent at that point, you have an artificial product in which I am the absolute best version that I can possibly be with hours of, like, practice and repetition, but that's not actually what I sound like off the top of my head. And I think few people are like that. I think there's one of the frustrating things about mass communications and broadcast communications, I think, is that they prize a certain sort of facility with words, a certain well-spokenness that is maybe implies a certain depth or substance that may or may not be there at all, right? And I think this is one of the paradoxes of modern communications, is just that we all look at people and we all have an idea now of what an intelligent, thoughtful person should roughly sound like. But a lot of times that is informed by performance more than reality.
Yeah, totally. All right, I'm going to move to a new question so that we don't just like look at our own belly buttons for the rest of the show, which we would totally do. If you asked us to do 2 hours on that question, we could do 2 hours on that question because we've all been doing this for long enough and are also a little bit narcissistic. Maybe you've been able to tell. Okay, this one comes in from B, who says, "Hey, Vice Games crew. First of all, I should say that I'm extremely frustrated with the state of this country and world right now. In so many ways, I cannot find the words. From the White House to sports, it's disgusting me, the way that we value money more than lives. Yes, I participate in capitalism, and it makes me sick. I work in NCAA Division I athletics.
Wow.
So far, I have been fairly protected from COVID-19, but I wonder what happens when the NCAA decides that we need a football season. It just lost billions of dollars due to cancellation of the men's and women's basketball tournaments. To be honest, mostly because the men's tournament was canceled. Presumably, I guess the women's tournament, unfortunately, does not bring in the bucks, despite women being incredible basketball players. Anyway, I have been pondering on, just to be clear, I didn't mean all women everywhere are incredible basketball players, or just how that sounded. This is a good example of us just talking like it's just you and me. I was like, even though women are just incredible
when
at
allyship
basketball.
gets weird.
I am an incredible. I'm 5'1.5", and I'm an incredible basketball player.
I'm not a gender essentialist, except for in this one way. All women are great basketball players. Anyway, I've been pondering on what happens this fall. Everyone from our coaching staff and administration talk about being safe and taking care of yourself, but the reality of it is that they only care about the money they've lost and their programs. We have a certain coach who is currently breaking his mandatory 14-day self-quarantine state travel requirement, something in which the $5,000 fine would hardly hurt his wallet. I find it morally disgusting that the NCAA, and more importantly, athletic departments and coaches would allow, quote, amateur athletes that don't fully appreciate the risks to play sports without a vaccine. On top of that, this is the risk that it places on me and my colleagues and support staff. It seems ridiculous that we are even considering putting thousands of people at risk just to play football. I was feeling extremely boned about this over the last week, and then I read this story this morning from The Atlantic, and I just feel like I lost all hope. And then this is, of course, a link to the Adam Sower Atlantic piece, "The Coronavirus Was an Emergency Until Trump Found Out Who Was Dying," which lays out a case basically arguing that a lot of the lack of response after the initial wave, in the last month or so, is something you can tie to the fact that it is a lot of black and brown people dying, that there is a racial component to this that has eased the need for dramatic systemic overhaul, has made a lot of Republicans who were otherwise kind of in the conversation for big dramatic legislation back off a little bit because they know it's not their constituents who are being hurt as badly as, let's say, people like me. Let me continue. I also want you to know the podcast episodes that I love the most are the ones where you talk politics. Sure, I love when you talk about games, but I'd really love to hear you take on the subject of Trump as he's handling the pandemic in relation to the social contract, and also maybe your thoughts on the NCAA and returning to sports. This email is much longer than originally intended. Thanks for making a great podcast and for your time. Kindest regards. Thank you very much for your kind regards. A thing that doesn't even come up in this email is, of course, that amateur athletes are making a lot of money for the NCAA and for their universities, and are not getting a cut of it at all. And that is fucked already. On top of that, I really, really, really hope that there is enough pressure to keep the NCAA from putting people in huge stadiums this fall. But I have my doubts. I suspect, like this emailer, that we're going to see football return in some capacity. I'm worried about it. I don't know. Maybe there'll be empty stadiums. Maybe there'll be...
Yeah. But even then, you're interacting with all those people up close. Like, that's just another vector to fucking...
Yep, yeah. Totally. Yeah, that's how I feel.
Mad. Just get upset. Bad. It's bad. Yeah,
totally. Like, again, I think it emphasizes, again, the ways in which... For me, it's going to come back to labor, right? Which is like the idea that like the reason they have to go back is because of the lost value is underlining the fact that they produce value. You know what I mean? Like this is... Yeah.
If we at first acknowledge that every single person on the world has value, whether or not they are a basketball player, then we can understand that the way that we preserve the value is by having them not work at this time and live.
Right.
You know?
Yeah, totally. Well, the other thing here, again, the thing that I think it brings into relief is like would the NCAA be upset if what they were losing was, or these universities be upset if what they were losing was only equal to the scholarship money being paid to these athletes? Would that make them as upset as this? No, they could eat that loss. That loss isn't great, but it isn't like bankruptcy. It isn't like, oh no, what the fuck do we do? What they're losing is all the surplus value that's created on top of whatever scholarships are being paid, on top of whatever it costs to ferry people around the country. What they're losing is all of the money from merchandise, from ticket sales, from concessions, from sponsorship deals. All that stuff is the stuff that they're losing money on. And all that stuff is stuff that these athletes, most of whom will not go on to play professional sports, most of whom will go on to like work at a car dealership or, you know, get into an accounting at some point in their lives, or who even knows what, become a priest, who knows, will not have that money that they help generate for their schools. And I think that is such an important aspect of this. We'll figure out a politics conversation sometime soon. I think most of us have just been exhausted, and those episodes, we talked about research before, take a lot more research because I want to be extra buttoned up on that stuff. So yeah. Any other thoughts here, or should I go back into the old bucket?
Maybe we take a break and then back into the old bucket?
Yeah, that sounds good to me. Let's take a quick break. BRB. All right, we are back with more questions and hopefully answers. This comes in from, what was our last question? Our last question was the NCAA, or was the last question
NCAA? Yeah,
NCAA. So we're going back. We're going back in time. We're going back in time. All right. Well, this one comes in from Harry, who says, with the recent release of Spider-Man, you who live in places depicted in video games often look around for different landmarks, such as your apartment building or office. Do you think games will ever try to recreate a real place one-to-one? Would that even make for good level design? Would it be fun to walk that distance in something like Fallout, or does a game need to shrink the world to make it fun while also having landmarks one would expect from places depicted? That's Harry. Thoughts?
I think you always need to elide some stuff, right? Like, the problem is that there's a lot of stuff that, even if you live in a city, like, there's parts of it that look, particularly industrial places, that look like copy pasted, right? Like warehouse neighborhoods, you don't need to actually model everything that goes into like warehouse zones in a city, because like they're huge and also just like they're boring. It's just the thing that you end up with there is that you are diluting the experience for the sake of fidelity, but there's not the fidelity anybody cares about, right? Like, so I think in general you're going to see that kind of elision taking place, just because there's so little demand for full one-to-one recreation.
The only thing that comes to mind is something like flight simulators, stuff where you're traveling a distance so fast, and what you're mostly looking at is interesting backdrops. Space sims, where what you're doing is, instead of eliding stuff like in the abstraction sense, you're eliding stuff by having faster than light travel, so that really what you're doing is just creating a bunch of boxes that you're flying around in, stuff like that. And then games that are like very much about trying to capture a very small space. We've talked about the Hitman games. But like, even when you look at something like Dishonored, where like, yes, you're walking around a hospital or a neighborhood, it's clear that like this was level design first. This is not, here is how this space historically came together and looks. Good level design and art assets will communicate the idea of a space coming together over time instead of being kind of built modularly overnight. It's not like I always think about areas in games, especially in big RPGs that do this, that make it look like this whole area was built yesterday, or was all built 50 years ago, and everything looks exactly 50 years ago. Like, oh yeah, this is our area that's like from the 1950s or whatever, and it's all looks like the 1950s. And it's like, well, no, because someone else moved into this neighborhood and built a shitty, new house that doesn't match the rest of the area, the rest of the stuff around it. Or this person has like a pool that looks different, or the paint job over here should be different, or the materials being used would have changed over time. And real neighborhoods have character, but also have exceptions, or that character kind of spans a number of generations. And that's one of the things that I see in terms of art assets that miss a lot. But good art and good level design can communicate a history through its design and through its like layering, basically, of different types of locations and different types of material usage and stuff like that. So I'm having a hard time coming up with specific examples, but I know that these are things I look for when I think about them.
Thinking about this actually when I walk around outside New York now, like what actually communicates a place where people are living or have lived in that's currently on decline. And you see like a lot less of the graffiti, like, the end is here. Although I did see one of those recently on a walk and I was like, come on, loser, like fuck off. But it was like, you see that stuff, but that was someone like doing a bit, someone winkingly, knowingly gesturing towards pop culture. And when you see those kinds of things in level design, you know that is someone taking an extreme shorthand to communicate something to you very quickly. And I feel like that is the difference between designing something in terms of level design and designing something in terms of aesthetics, in terms of creating a place, like a lived-in place. And the stuff that I've noticed, like walking around in Brooklyn, that makes me feel like, oh, something's happening. Something's a little bit different here. It's just like a lot more garbage everywhere. And like the detritus includes new materials that I hadn't seen before, like masks and gloves are now part of the garbage collection that just sort of is in the drains of Bushwick. So that's been sort of illuminating when I think about how to create a narrative within a space and a place, and what video games don't do very well.
Totally.
Yeah.
I think you could say that, and this is probably just because it's on the mind, but Final Fantasy VII does a good job of having different kind of spaces. Thinking specifically kind of to Aerith's house compared to some of the rest of the slums, and like the way that even the slums themselves have kind of this mismatched architecture in places.
Yeah.
Versus like on top of plate, which is like more uniformly industrial.
Yeah. My favorite stuff is stuff that like blends it a little bit more. Like almost like you could feel the paintbrush of time versus here is one place, here is another place. You know what I mean? But again, I'm like, I know this is a thing I've written about games. I'm now struggling to think about a particular place because that's where my brain is at after not sleeping last night. So how it be.
Sometimes it do be like that, but sometimes. I know what you mean. Like there is a complete difference between designing a space to be played in and designing a space to actually represent a space. And I do feel like there's something in our current moment that's like really making me think about this a lot, just because so many games are set in like a post-apocalyptic space with like evil graffiti everywhere and like I don't know, like just a toilet full of shit, and like we don't live during an apocalypse. We live during a time where things have changed for us socially, economically, in ways that are mostly bad, and things seem a little dire. And there's also a deadly virus, which usually is part of these apocalypse plots. And that's not at all how the environment has changed. It's changed in smaller ways, less obvious ways. And it's just making me think about how humans affect a space by living in it. I think the one thing for me, when I think about games that are designed like levels that are supposed to be a city but feel like a level, is like you don't think about how human beings would be in that space and how human beings would like go to the store or like pick up some groceries, go to the bodega. Like, where do they buy their bread?
Then the thing is, I think for a lot of games, they function on that absence, right? Like you allied that specific stuff because that's just not the focal point, and because introducing it can create a sort of tension or friction. And so I can imagine sometimes it might look like this doesn't look like a real place. Where would people buy their bread? Issuing that as a critique, when in fact the answer is like, yeah, we couldn't show you where their fucking bread came from because you would think about where their bread came from.
Yeah.
And this like very thin narrative reasoning for this place being here to begin with would fall apart. Shoot the aliens. And
Please,
I'm not
we're
like
begging
defending
you.
that perspective necessarily, but yes. Speaking of shooting the aliens, this question comes in from Steven, who says, preface. This is a new one. I've been a professional game developer for over a decade, and you've played games I've worked on. This is only relevant because I talk about cost estimates below. I like to say anonymous because expressing public concern about this is not at all worth the potential blowback. Question. Why is Bright Memory being talked about as a wholly original work instead of a remix? For people who don't remember, Bright Memory Infinite was at that Xbox event last week. It looked really cool. Rob and Kato and I geeked out about it and talked about how the combat looked great and how the setting looked like bananas and kind of cool. Steven writes, this game was made with tens of thousands of dollars of wholly stolen assets from other games, ripped from commercial games not purchased on an asset store. It was sold on Steam with those assets. It made a lot of money being sold for cheap because stealing assets is cheaper than making them. Afterwards, the developer acknowledged the theft and promised to replace the assets. They changed the models, but not the rigs or animations, which are more costly to produce. They continue to sell it on Steam and are now being promoted by Microsoft. For what it's worth, I just quickly Googled around and had definitely saw the accusations, saw the person owning up to it, promising to change it, saw changed assets. I couldn't quickly confirm that the rigs and animations were still the same because that's a deeper dive thing, and I didn't see anyone else who had done that reporting yet. But, Steven is saying this, so let me repeat it in Steven's words. If the copyright holders chose not to pursue legal action, that's fine. It would be hard to prove damages. If Valve chooses to profit by selling stolen material because they're too big to notice, that's their choice. If Microsoft wants to give it a platform because it looks cool, I won't stand in their way. But I really wish Games Press would stop saying it was made by one person. The truth is so much more interesting, and the lie hurts independent developers who incur the costs of either buying or making their own assets. Remember the incredulity when Skullgirls said, Lab Zero said, what it would cost to make more characters during the Skullgirls Kickstarter. Propagating the myth that that Bright Memory was made by one person part-time has real consequences. Not everyone has the luxury of selling stolen goods until they can afford to make their own product. I've seen some outlets write little blurbs about accusations or rumors of asset theft, but that's kind of a cop-out. It would take a little time to verify the accusations by just watching a few Let's Plays from last year and even watching the recent trailer footage. It's definitely worth discussing Bright Memory in the context of remix culture. They created something new using existing stuff, and what they made looks great. It's not being acknowledged as a remix, though. Like I said above, media treating it like an original work is a big slap in the face to the artists, designers, and animators who toiled to make those assets for their games. I think it's a really interesting question, and I appreciate that the person writing in framed it in terms of remix culture and remix in general, and is not just like, those are our assets. Especially given the differences in creation and blah 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 blah. But I'm also curious where that line is. Let's say this person did buy all those assets out from the store. Should we still then talk about it as a remix? Is there something coded in the way we use remix? Is there something like would we not call it a remix if this story hadn't broken that these were stolen assets and instead had all been purchased assets? Would everyone be more comfortable since it had the sort of like validity of the market on it somehow?
I think this is such an interesting question that demonstrates some of the differences between like the fine arts world and the world that video games exist in as artwork. In the fine arts world, it's totally fair to like literally just reprint something that someone else has made and recontextualize it, and it becomes a new piece. And like that is an artistic practice with a really intense history. There's a picture of, I think, not Cindy Crawford, but it would say a model who's posing nude when she was underage, and she was at the time not really aware of what was happening to her. And that original print is gone, but it was reprinted by another artist. This hangs in the Oberlin College Library, which is why I know all this. And the recontextualization of that print makes it its own legitimate art object that is not subject to the same suits that this woman had to have that image removed from literally the rest of the world. Like that's like a real thing. That's like a real thing that people do, and it's okay. And like people understand that this is something that happens. Sometimes you create things, and that thing itself becomes such a statement in and of itself that by fucking with, stealing, remixing, changing, recontextualizing that image, it does become its own legitimate piece of art. Video games doesn't live there, and I think that part of that is because of it's in the art world. Like so much of fine arts is invested in this idea of making money. I call this shit like hype beast art, like, you know, like stuff that just is made so that people will buy it and put it in their big fancy houses. But there's also a strong tradition of people that just make art for the sake of making art. Don't think that anything they make will sell. I don't know what my cat is trying to dig into. I think it's a poster. And it's something. So the divorce, like the idea that you don't necessarily have to make things for money, that you can find funding for your work through the other avenues, that the end product does not have to be something that sells, means that you can make art with different motivations, and you can make art that's riskier, art that might get shut down, art that might be you get sued for. And in the video game world, you can give things away for free, but you have to sell things. And that just is a different environment to make art in. So you care a lot more about ownership of things. Rob is making a face like he'd like to complicate what I'm saying somehow.
Well, I would just say, I think there's also there are certainly terms of art here that I'm not going to get correct, so apologies. But let's take rigging, for example, like the craft of making an animated character move correctly, and with the various elements of the character model move convincingly within the world. This is not necessarily rigging a character is not necessarily something that is the work of art in itself. It is a means to an end. It is part of the production of a creative work. And it starts getting really murky fast when you start taking that labor, that finished product, which is the rigging of a character, and start repurposing it to achieve the same effect for your own work. But you're not at that point, you're not compensating. You are not reinterpreting or recontextualizing someone else's work of art that makes its own statement and stands apart. What you are instead doing is you are taking a functional element and using it to create your own work of art. I think that's where it starts to get murky, right? Is there's all these other parts of the development and creation of video games that are not necessarily the solo artist, but are instead like parts of the production process where professionals expect and need to be compensated for the work.
And there is an absence of so let's imagine this in the world of painting, where let's say the equivalent of rigging, and this is a loose metaphor, is like taking someone's palette of colors, right? This is a tool set by which you make something, but even with paint, you might say, oh, wow, those colors remind me of such and such. Oh, wow, those, that process is just, it looks like the process of this other person who has been reinterpreted here. Rigging doesn't work like that. Animation doesn't work like that in video games because there is already an obfuscation and abstraction of labor in place.
Yes.
I'm not saying that the art world is fully concrete labor. I'm not saying that there is not abstraction. I'm not saying that there is not alienation from the product, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Absolutely labor exploitation in the fine arts world.
Of course. But
I think
if you
right,
tell me the name of an artist and show me their work, I will believe you that is their artist. Name a person who does animation in video games. Name a person who knows how rigging works, and name a rigger in video games.
9 times out of 10, if you're seeing a painting in a gallery, like a high-end gallery of any sort, where like people like you know the names of the artists already, there's been like 10 studio assistants that have painted that painting.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Like you do not know those names, and they're not even credited.
Who works for Nan Golden, and that's
right. That's photography. That's not even right. Like every medium has unnamed labor behind it that you never see, right? So it would be kind of like the idea of trying to mimic a brushstroke that you see in a Kahinda Wile that one of his studio assistants did, right?
Yeah.
And like,
yeah,
that's almost the closer analogy here to like rigging. It's like there's this invisible layer of like there's people that you'd never hear about working on these things that may or may not be being exploited depending on how well that person is taking care of their people. You know, like some.
Which means there
like,
is not even a mechanism by which to. If for instance you said, oh, and I want to license that brushstroke, that's not even going into the studio assistant's hand.
Right.
That wouldn't today. If the creator of Bright Memory was like, I want to license the dope backflips in Devil May Cry, right? The person who animated those dope backflip
lead designer
would not get cash. No, not at all. That would not go into Capcom. Would be like, thank you very much. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
My LinkedIn entry, dope backflips.
I would like your money, please.
Yes. Yeah. So no, I think that complicates things in a real way. And I suspect, but what I'm saying is I suspect that a world in which the person did go out and license it, did go to the asset store and purchase all of those things directly, we would talk about that person comfortably as being a solo creator.
Right.
Yes.
As long as that credit screen said, here's who I am, and then said, assets licensed from blah, 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 I think the conversation would be filled with people who are like, yeah, no, but he still made it. That one person still made it.
Yeah.
Whereas the second that we pull it out of it, we suddenly open the door to this other conversation about whether or not, you know, we're actually, you know, not just compensating, but crediting the people who are involved. And the better world would be one in which, regardless of how you arrive at that conversation, everyone gets not only credited, but is able to build something, right?
Yeah, I hate that, like, as I think through this conversation, a lot of times what I start doing in my head is trying to create, like, oh, what's the model where everyone gets paid out of this fairly? Which isn't really the question. Like, the question here is more specifically, like, hey, what do we do with assigning credit for this, right? Like, what do we do with acknowledging the contributions that make an art like this possible? Nobody's saying that Bright Memory is not effectively a game made by one person, but just like any game, it is still an assembly of a lot of assets and tools and designs that could not be generated by one person, even if there was some sort of savant across multiple disciplines. We still have the question of, like, how do we cite or credit this? But I do kind of wonder what we do with the whole the remix culture aspect of this. Kind of does interest me, because at the end of the day, we do want people to get paid. We do want people to be able to, like, have sustainable careers doing something. And there is always this class of craftspeople that it just seems inherent that, like, all models for this end up with folks like that getting exploited in some way, both denied credit in terms of being, like, known for their work and their contributions, and also forever being recognized as artists in their own right. And with all the material compensation that implies.
There's so many steps we'd need to take before we can truly, like, understand and appreciate the amount of labor that goes into a single video game of any size. Yeah. And, like, part of it starts with, like, allowing these workers to own the means of their production. And then part of it starts with just actually looking at the credits of things and trying to understand what these jobs are. And it's something that's just going to happen over time. Like, I think just about how young this medium is compared to the ones that we all compare it to. And part of it is just that we haven't created the systems that allow it to be easier to credit individual workers for their work. And some of that comes with time, some of that comes with compensation, some of that comes with shit.
Some of it comes with a complete overthrow of capitalism, because in the current model, the only thing the laborer has to sell is their labor power. That's the only commodity that we have access to, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, so let's just change the entire world so that
I'm down, so that we can give riggers so that we can give the person whose LinkedIn says the backflips dude.
Yeah,
that still doesn't solve the problem of the, like, in that system though, like But
at that point, we've destroyed the necessity of credit as such in that manner, right? Like we've this is a bigger conversation, one, that I think is important, because I think what it speaks to is one of the generational difficulties of moving out of capitalism, which is that all of us motherfuckers are going to want credit until we're in the grave, right? If someone quotes me in our post-capitalist utopia and they don't say Austin Walker said those words, something in me is going to like twinge, because I have been socialized by a system that demands that my self-worth comes from that thing, that comes from not a collective idea of achievement, but an individualist idea of achievement. It is very hard to shut that part of you off, even as you work towards that world. And so I do think that is what we're talking about here is at least a 2 generation long process before the person who has backflips dude on his LinkedIn doesn't worry about the fact that those backflips are showing up in projects, because
LinkedIn survives 2 generations.
Right. We also need to destroy LinkedIn. Step 1 to the revolution, burn it down. But no. But you're right, Rob, that it doesn't solve the problem, because the problem is epiphenomenal of the notion of individualism as an organizing structure for society. And it is important right now because of living in that system where the way that we are able to pay the rent is by pointing to a portfolio and pointing to the showing capital. Look at the surplus value I've generated before. As long as we're in the system, the way that I will be able to make my rent is I can go to a company, I can go to someone who is a billionaire or one of their representatives and say, here's all the money I've made. And if some of that money, so if I'm out there making money for someone else that I can't point to, then I'm not able to get a job as easily as other people who maybe can have that. And so that whole system corrupts this whole process, corrupts. I'm willing to use the word corrupts in this moment. Thank you for this picture of a cat, Gita.
Do we want to all right.
Here we go.
If we get to the system where people don't need to work jobs like that, it might turn out that a bunch of us love products where like somebody animated the shit out of trees in that product. Like, oh man, fuck, I just love being out in this world, because like, oh man, when a breeze comes through and like the tree, it looks so good. It will never occur to me that, hey, there's probably that's just a person, probably a really clever team, building and designing these forests and the way they move. But it might turn out that in a world where, like, say, Ubisoft doesn't need to be making giant open world games, or that whole business model has imploded, it might turn out that like the people who do that just don't actually did not set out to be like, I just want to animate some fucking sick forests. I love animating trees. And so I think the other problem we start running into is a lot of these crafts exist to some extent because there is a larger work that finds those crafts both necessary and will also create infrastructure to compensate people for generating those assets. If you start like chipping away at the structure where we start like we no longer have this model where we are selling these products, I am really curious how many folks would still be doing a lot of these things out of intrinsic motivation. I don't know. Like, how many people are creating models for just to be in the background of shooters, right? Totally. Like, I make convincing looking office decor for shooters.
This is not my dream, but I'm good at it.
Yeah. Right.
You know what actually addresses this? The first season of Shirobako, there's a character that gets into CG animation and she just has to make tire treads over and over. And she's like, I want to make anime. And the boss is like, too bad, you're doing car commercials.
Well, if I'm honest, Rob, I guess we got less shooters in this world. My guess is people will still, I'm certain that people will still want to collaborate on things. Yeah. People will still be moved to work together. We'll still want to work with dramatic visionaries of certain media. People will still build monuments and still make films and still make games. Along the way, you're right. There are going to be less telephones placed on desks in first-person shooters. there will also be genres for which we do not yet have names. I'm happier with that world. I'll trade away my bright memory.
Oh, come on, that's not what I was saying.
I don't need.
No, I know.
I know,
but it is. But it is. But you're
like-
right that there will be a material change in what games are produced because people will not want to be part of the system that demands the abstract labor, the creation of these things as commodity, the office desk furniture, like asset pack internalized in Ubisoft. That model will not exist the way it does because there will not be a demanding public that requires an Assassin's Creed 8 that needs to not only have Viking story but also some sort of future mode where you're walking around an office and blah 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 blah. Like that won't be there will not be a profit motive that drives towards that game necessarily. I suspect big games will continue to exist. I suspect there will still be huge publicly funded
there is a market for a Call of Duty, There's a
Also,
market
if you
for
don't
a
think
good
that someone-
there won't be a
multiplayer
market.
Yeah, there's not even a market, but there's a desire culturally for a good multiplayer shooting-based game.
Yeah, and I bet Rob
People want it,
As
It will
long
be
as-
different, though, than the ones that we have now. And that is something we're going to have to learn to accept. Probably the change will happen so gradually, we won't even learn to accept it. We will just
No, we're going to be the old heads
notice
who hate it. We're going to be the old heads who hate it. We're going to be the people who are like, where's my perk system?
Remember when the
I
Red
don't
Dead
know.
Redemption horses'
Rob?
balls
I
swayed
might
in
come
the
out
wind?
okay in this.
Yeah.
Because it turns out what people want to make is like Red Orchestra 3 or something like that, where like people are like, I want to make a hyper detailed shooter.
Totally.
But it's going to be more like Receiver, where like you have to hand load your magazines.
Yeah.
That would be great.
And
Yeah, I
then
would
carry
take that-
those into battle. It's gonna be like lovingly detailed, but also be unfucking playable. And I'll be like, yeah,
give me that.
This is a fucking shooter.
No, this is
Call
it.
of Duty will be ashes and dust, just totally gone. Or maybe in this world,
I mean, I
it'll be
think-
made of asset rips from
From-
my weird like magazine
I mean,
loading shooter.
I can imagine a team like Respawn, who always seems to be running on on a wish and a prayer, using assets other people have built to make the same technically competent, incredibly detailed shooters that
Right.
they've always been making.
Or the
It will
opposite.
Or the opposite,
What if Respawn is publicly funded to make the best shooter in the world, but all the assets they produce are public domain?
That would be incredible, right?
But
That would
they're
be
going to keep
amazing.
they're going to keep getting this government grant to keep making the best, coolest new shit possible, and that's going to keep food on everyone's table. No one gets rich off this.
Yep.
Everyone gets to live a comfortable life. There are no executives in place.
Yeah. I think
I'm
there's
just
a
saying we
lot
should
of...
nationalize Respawn
that'd be-
Entertainment.
Can we
today.
nationalize Respawn Entertainment today? The season's about to start.
And of course,
in
this opens up
45
minutes.
minutes.
Right. This opens up a million ideas, a million potential conflicts around the national character of the national game studio. This changes, of course, there are going to be conflicts down that road. Who gets public funding? Who doesn't get public funding? Let me tell you, it's going to break down along the margins the way it always fucking does. But when we radicalize the entire system, we can bring more people into that structure. And also, the people at the margins will suddenly have assets available to them produced by some of the finest minds in game development in this system. Anyway,
Yeah, I have one brief aside that we can. I'm going to introduce it, and then I'm sure Austin will immediately cut me off for the quagmire that it introduces to the conversation.
oh boy, here
But
we go.
I think part of the problem with this also is the way that video games are obsessed with auteur theory, which is a theory I don't even think works or is real in contemporary cinema.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a big part of why we say this is why. I think you're right. This is why we say, "Oh, one person made this game," is because. But I also think
When you
I've
talk
always
about Neil Druckmann, you're not actually talking about the things that Neil Druckmann personally is responsible for, which is
Right.
not the boss-looking trees or the fur on the animals. He's
Right.
not responsible for that. He's the overall project lead. He directed this game, but other individual people are doing the things that make that game the game that it is. And video games are bad at appreciating that. And they're also, and celebrating it, celebrating the work that individual people do. And they are really, a lot of people are really interested in being able to lift up individual figures in the same way you would a Hollywood director. And I think that that's a flawed way to look at Hollywood and anything outside of boutique filmmaking where it is really driven by one singular vision. But it's also a really, the analogy does not work for video games because there's a lot more shit going on. And a lot of these teams have much finer control over the shit they do. And there's also this huge corporate component when you get into AAA. But this is my thing. I've been waiting to write this essay for years.
I think that like there's a thing here that happens not just in creative, labor, but especially in creative labor. And I think maybe there's an extension here that's interesting in the ways in which immaterial labor and kind of post-Fordist companies, kind of contemporary service-based economy stuff, wants to take on part of the character of creative labor and culture industry. One of the critiques levied towards mid-century American culture industries was that it was sort of giving Hollywood cinema gave the individual American or actually the individual person in the world watching Hollywood cinema, the idea that they had choice and possibility. It gave them what Adorno called pseudo individuation. This idea of like, hey, there are no structures around us. We can all be the person who moves to Hollywood and becomes a fancy star, because all of the movies that Hollywood makes in the 1950s are about moving to Hollywood and becoming a fancy star. Now, they might end up being tragedies, but on the way there, look at all this space and possibility we have, when in fact, here is a moment at which that space and possibility are being restricted. I think the irony is, or maybe this is an irony so much as like, of sort of the dreadful reality is that that same aspect, that same character in the culture industry's products was also happening the way we narrativized the culture industries themselves, and that ends up being the sort of like overflow from golden age cinema into 60s 70s auteur theory cinema, as suddenly we instead of producing movies that are about the star who represents all of our possible flexibility and possible maneuverability inside of a society that constrains us, we made the director the pseudo individual who represents our ability to achieve inside of a system. The Hollywood system did not fall apart.
A very specific scene, more in France, that was then imported to America.
Right, totally,
in France, where they had a different structure of making movies and a group of people who deliberately encouraged the structure and solidified it so that this could be true.
Right. Well, and so that same system, I think, never went away, right? We all accepted that, of course, the Hollywood movies, of course, now, you think about a game is optimized in such a way to give you the feeling of succeeding and blah, blah, blah. Like, of course, we recognize all of that. But that second layer of and then we tell stories about individual creators as if the same systems that we know are being evaded inside of our favorite narratives aren't then being redeployed in the establishment of those figures as idols, as people who've broken out of that system. I think that happens a lot, and I think gaming is in the moment where it's looking to do that more and more. We have a million questions in old and new question bucket about auteurs, about whether or not we think Kojima or Druckmann or whatever is the equivalent of Spielberg or whatever, and I think that is
Michael Bay.
Yeah, well,
Michael Bay is an auteur. I will argue that, though.
That's the one exception. Michael Bay
within the Hollywood system, just Michael Bay. I honestly believe that. Yeah.
I think you and Cameron Kunzelman are Michael Bay Defense Fund. So yeah.
No, I think he sucks. I just think he's an auteur.
But you think also he's an auteur? I see. Yeah, yes, fair. So that is the thing there. Is I definitely think that there is this moment of it all emerges from that same tension. I think again that is the same tension that produces an Elon Musk who wants to be seen as and who frames his own narrative as an auteur.
He's not the sole author of the company. Even I just learned today that he bought out the two founders.
Oh, of Tesla? Yeah.
Of Tesla.
Yes, he did not even found Tesla. That is correct. He is not on the floor, but his stands will tell you in your mentions that actually he's the genius behind every good decision they make and none of the bad ones. Anyway.
Their factory's open again today. In direct defiance of the order.
It's a nightmare. I think one final question here, I think complicates this even further, which is really interesting. Sravan writes in 2016, hey, I've been playing games for over 2 decades now, and the one constant that I find myself drawn back to repeatedly is feel. A game can be absolute crap as far as it tells its story or even its overall design, but if a game has either of these two properties, one, its controls and basic mechanics are smooth, two, it feels satisfying to pull off difficult sequences of action, then I will play the game to no end despite how objectively terrible it might be in other aspects. Destiny is a great example of this. Sublime mechanics, but arguably bad in most of its other aspects. I will not... Kato, I know you want to go in. I appreciate the restraint here.
I agree, it's bad.
All right. I would say I would object to the use of things like objectively bad, but of course I would. Most of the time, this is for good reason. It's hard enough to describe these elements in a video, let alone when you're using words. In other words, the good reason why we struggle to talk about this stuff. That being said, I still feel like this is a missed opportunity. After all, it is the interactivity of the medium that separates it from the rest. Do y'all have any suggestions about how this can be changed? How can the mechanics of a game and its feel be explained in a detailed, vivid, and interesting way? Loving the podcast. Keep up the great work. I think this is one of the challenges of contemporary games criticism,
Yes.
for sure.
I never know how to describe how a game feels, and I try so hard. And I try to find a specific moment and describe the physicality of it, describe my reaction of it, and hope that translates through to like the rest of the experiential. Like the reader understands that like this is a good example of the experience of playing this physically. But I'm never sure, and I don't actually know if that's like the right method.
Yeah.
I think this is kind of what led to new games journalism in some ways, which is now very old games journalism.
Wild.
But I think so much of that was about trying to communicate feel that wasn't possible in the product review model, certainly. Like that was like you could describe what you do, but it would be just dry description. You couldn't get across the quality of how this all worked, what the experience of doing all this felt like. And I think what that naturally leads you towards is if I create something that says what a game feels like to me, chances are what I'm going to fall back on is stuff that's really specific to me, right? Like I'm going to be making references. I'm going to be describing things that will, if I'm writing, like if there were another Rob Zachney that I'm like trying to, like that person will get it. Like the description would work for me because I'm going to be leveraging experiences, images, all these things that sort of, and references that resonate with someone like me. And that's going to work there's going to be enough overlap that I think we will get there. But I think it does also lend itself to writing that can sometimes feel real Navy-gazy or like really sort of self-involved. Because I think a lot of times just by necessities, you try to communicate like, look, here's this thing. And it might sound really generic, but in terms of how I reacted to it, it was actually really powerful. But I have to explain to you why it was powerful to me. And the best I can do is say like, and maybe that'll do something for you. Maybe that'll mean something to you. If not, there's other reviews. They will do something different that will maybe work.
Yep.
Yeah, no, that is it. That has always been the way I've had to think about it. I would say as an editor, this is the number one note that I give. And I think everyone on this call can maybe the number one note I give is like, what is your thesis here? But my number two is like, you're not describing what it feels like to play this game at all. You're not talking about playing the game. You're giving me a summary of what the feature set is, or you're telling me in abstract sense what the verbs are that you're using, but like there's no you in this. Put you in this text. I need you to tell me what your physical experience was about this. And that
but
means
then I will also be editing it and being like, no one gives a shit about this.
Yeah.
What do you do in this? Riley McLeod, when I was working at Kotaku, that was the note he always gave me, which it was, you don't say what the game is. And I've come to like actually understand and appreciate that critique because I'm always going for the experiential. But you do need to like ground people in your description of what you do in a video game. And I never say it in my first draft.
Like, well, everyone knows what this is. Well, it's also difficult in the age of streaming, in the age of, like Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 1 and 2 collection was just announced. And I'm guessing that when you sit down to write, it was just announced. It was a remaster moments ago. It looks like they got at least some of the soundtrack back, which is exciting. When that game comes out, it's going to be very hard to remember, if you're of our generation, you're going to need to put in effort to remember that you have to set up what this game is and how you play it and what you do in it, instead of just talking about like, oh yeah, it's Tony Hawk.
It's basically defined how you skateboard in games. So when I think about try to describe what you do in it, my first impulse is to say you skateboard, which just doesn't describe anything at all.
Well, no, especially because, like, do you? Or are you
don't.
doing something else in these games?
You're not. You're doing something. I mean, it's actually a pretty good facsimile of a particular kind of skating, but it is not skateboarding. Skateboarding is something different.
Yeah. Anyway, I think that's probably going to do it with us. I hope that whoever did the backflips in Tony Hawk Pro Skater 1 and 2 compilation, remastered, whatever, gets the credit they're due. I think that is the.
I thought you were going to say
final.
The original people who did the backflips in the first one.
No, well, and that's a whole other aspect to that. I mean, that's the other thing is that whole other aspect of the conversation we didn't have is, of course, that there is always an invisible lineage in which every game and every artistic process exists. There are always countless more people to be credited than make it onto the credits because of the way knowledge is passed on, because of the way people constantly lift from other artists, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But we don't have the time, nor the runtime.
I have like 1,000 things to say about Tony Hawk also, and I think we need to stop podcasting.
We need to stop podcasting, or else we're going to go on about Tony Hawk. I hope Tony Hawk is dealing with the fact that under the lockdown, he can't just wander through places where people can be like, are you Tony Hawk? You remind me of Tony Hawk.
I hope his kids are saying that to him every day right now.
Me too. Getting breakfast with him in the breakfast nook. Yeah. Is that you in this game?
Is that you? Man, I used to love Tony Hawk Pro Skater. Is that you?
Whatever happened to this guy?
I like it when people ask him what happened to him, and he's like, well, I'm right here.
I'm still here.
Yep.
I'm still here.
I'm doing this.
Shout out to this person on Twitter who said, we don't want Tony Hawk Remastered. We want Skate 4. Skate motherfucking 4.
What?
Did you see? Okay, wait. Did you see that? Did you see this?
Did you skate shit?
The skate shit. All right, I have to pull this up immediately. We're gonna go out on this. All right, I'm just gonna read from Jordan Oleman's piece over at IGN. Skateboarding legend Jason Dill was reportedly called by EA to discuss a mobile version of Skate 3 and was subsequently told the company doesn't want to make a Skate 4. He also said that a new Tony Hawk Pro Skater game is coming this year. This was last week. In an episode of a podcast, The 9 Club, a podcast run by professional skateboarder Chris Roberts, Dill hopped on for a chat, revealing that he'd been called by EA about his participation in a potential mobile version of Skate 3. Quote, I got a call from EA people about 10 months ago, and they said, hey, we want to talk about the skate games. This person emailed me and said basically, hey, Jason, we want to do a mobile version of Skate 3. And I wrote back and said, what else? She wrote back, no, that's it. And I wrote back, look, no big deal. No one wants your stupid mobile version of Skate 3. Make Skate fucking 4 already. Fans have been clamoring, blah, blah, blah. Quote, just do it. Just make the game and just participate again. You can't level it to the same numbers you get on other games. You do Skate 4 for a cultural thing that pays you back later. And that's how corporations can work if they play their cards right. I don't believe that that's how corporations can work if they play that. Unfortunately. EA wrote back to Dill saying that it just wasn't looking to pursue Skate 4, to which Dill replied, well, have a lot of luck on Need for Speed 29. I won't be in your stupid mobile game.
Wow. Oh, shit. Man, that guy does skateboard and care about skateboarding culture. All I think about, I don't want to talk about the modern. There would be such a good skateboarding game just built out of what skateboarding is right now, which is this really interesting conflict between people who are getting picked up and sponsored by Nike skateboarding, which people think is like a corporate sellout move, which I don't blame them, but they do make really good skateboarding shoes. Versus people who go out and still street skate. Like a lot of young black kids basically go out and street skate and saw off, parts of the handlebars on stairs so that they can actually grind down them and do vandalism and shit. And I like to see at least one person that cares about skateboarding saying good luck on Need for Speed 29.
29, good luck.
That's in the latter pedigree, and I love that.
God. So yeah, I on that note, let's wrap things up. Good luck on the rest of your weeks. Genuinely, I hope everyone does all right. As always, if you have questions, you can send them into gaming@vice.com. We got through 4 today in this question bucket deep dive episode.
Love it.
You already know what the fuck. We could never do a Ruination cast. We just couldn't do it. Like a 3-minute per question thing.
No.
We wouldn't
I
get a
would
single
die.
thought out.
No.
I wouldn't get a single
We
thought
would
out.
get 2 in and then have to elaborate on something.
The first
We
2
should
minutes
try.
would be
We
us
should
going,
try. We should do a time. We should just lift the Ruination cast from Idle Thumbs. BPS, I miss Idle Thumbs. Feel like shit, just want her back. I hope those folks
When
are
you
doing
talk
well.
about games being objectively better, I almost brought up Kirk Hamilton being like Far Cry 3 objectively better than Far Cry 2. Which
oh my god.
it's a moment I
That
adore
did
because
not-
Kirk is
That aged like milk, Kirk Hamilton.
he's okay.
Wasn't it?
even in the moment, the minute he said it, you could see like Kirk wanting to bring the words back into his mouth, but it was too late.
Was that a delicious
great.
dish? Was that episode?
God, I can't remember.
I did a search for a delicious dish. Idle Thumbs, episode 86. Always support the danger layer, and thank God for whoever. I always forget the name of the person who ran the Idle Thumbs YouTube. Who put all the great timestamps in? I don't remember, but it's the secret of Monkey Island. It's objectively a delicious dish. I love and miss Idle Thumbs so much. If any of those folks are listening, shout outs to them. You can send your questions gaming@vice.com. Maybe we'll get to them one day. Maybe 4 years after you send them in. Who could say? You can follow me on Twitter at Austin_Walker. Where can people find you, Gita?
You can find me on Twitter at XOXOGossipGita. I'm also on Instagram, where you can find pictures of my cat. Same username.
Kato, how about you?
At A_Kato_appears.
Rob Zachney.
I think our Ruination cast would basically just look like the Russian roulette scene in The Deer Hunter.
Deer Hunter,
as
yeah.
we just try to do our takes. Like, okay, here's, like, read the question, and, like, headband. Like, take.
Yeah.
Yeah.
God.
Me looking at you, Austin, it's in the power of your mind. You're gonna will this take out of you. At Rob Zachney on Twitter.
At Rob Zachney. You know, why didn't Michael Cimino ever get the auteur treatment that the rest of his contemporaries did? You know what I mean?
I'm not going to say anything because I know the answer to this, and we got it in the podcast.
All right.
He couldn't, the follow-up was troubled. Anyway,
Okay,
going on.
I see.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, as always, you can follow us all at twitter.com/waypoint, waypoint.vice.com, vice.com/games. Shout outs to our good friends at Motherboard. Shout outs as always to Bowen for letting us use the track Miss You off the EP Pale Machine. Find out more about that, waypoint.zone/BOEN. As always, as we continue through this week, fuck capitalism. Go home. Peace.
Also, like, The Deer Hunter's fine. You know, like...
Yeah, but it has the characteristics of a film that should have...
You know what's interesting?
Let me tell you this. A lot of films are fine, really. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
Anyway.
Lindsay Ellis did a great video about the history of Oscar bait, and The Deer Hunter is actually where she pinpoints the trend being solidified. Not necessarily being invented, but solidified.
No.
The trend of a critically acclaimed movie that wins a lot of awards that does poorly at the box office, which has become the model for a lot of Oscar winners since then.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
So that's what Lindsay says. The follow-up to that movie was also just deeply troubled. He had a bad time. I read the whole Wikipedia page one time when I was high.
Damn.
Yeah. That's what I do mostly is when I'm in quarantine, I'm in the middle of like 6, like no joke, like 6 books. I started reading Paul Beatty's The Sellout, and then I started reading like a bunch of other books at the same time. That book rocks, by the way. Have you read The Sellout, Austin?
No.
Oh my god, it's about in the the tradition of Black humor about a guy who gets arrested by the U.S. government a Black man for trying to reinstate slavery and owning a slave. It's so
Great.
funny. It's
Wow.
so
Okay.
hilarious. It is. It's a big thing to say, but I read
It is.
the first chapter and I was like literally laughing out loud, and that rarely happens to me.
Amazing.
Yeah. It's hilarious. But yeah, like cinema. Anyway, I have a
Cinema.
degree in it.
All
I'm
right.
gonna stop
I'm gonna
talking.
go-
Bye bye.
All right.
Look at this shit. Oh, she knows she's being watched now.
Oh yeah, she's performing now. Mina is like, oh, I got an audience. Let me just be as cute as possible.
Yeah, but no, she's trying to rip apart a pillow. That,
Oh, I
like,
see.
repeatedly. So that gray pillow she's got, it's got a little like floppy fringe,
Uh-huh.
and she's like, that means it's a toy. I have to take that away from her in a minute.
I need to get some more.
See, she gets very subtle too, where she like buries her face in it and then just like
Uh-huh.
teases it with her front teeth.
Oh
So
yeah.
you can't see her doing like chomping.
Very stealthy.
She's-
Oh, I
Okay,
see
Well,
her.
that
Uh-huh.
yeah. See, now it's just outright criminal behavior. Mina, leave it.
Oh, Mina. This is how you get the pillow taken away. You're not gonna have it at all in a second.
Oh no.
Is it open? Has she done true damage?
Oh yeah.
Oh,
Oh,
Mina.
yeah.
Mina.
All of this stems from the fact that I stood up a minute ago and got myself a glass of water, but I did not feed Mina. And we're within 30 minutes of when she gets lunch. And so
Mhm.
a great wrong has been done her.
Mhm.
I must chew. I have no lunch there, so I must chew.
Mhm.
I'm gonna get a cat. I think we finally decided.
Oh hell yeah! Get a cat.
Cats
Cats are great.
cat will be the easier thing to do right now. But what helped push us
Welcome
over the
back.
edge, hey, was that a old classmate found a kitten, walked onto her stoop, like they were just hanging out on their stoop in Baltimore, and a kitten just walked onto their stoop, was like, hello, take care of me, I'm small.
Seems like the best way to get a cat.
Yeah, right? Just like out of nowhere, here's a cat. And it is
So what's this?
adorable.
Oh, cat.
Yeah, I was just saying that I'm probably gonna get a cat because
Yes!
I want a pet, and
Yay!
cats are probably easier to get right now and have while indoors. I don't know.
Yeah,
But
my
our
friend Arbo found a dog that someone tied up in the rain, and then recently the owner came back and took it back.
what?
So, yeah, fucked up. He tied it up in the rain, and the dog was not neutered. Like, I don't.
Mm.
Okay, you don't deserve to have a dog. Arbo was a better dog owner. You deserve to have a cat. I'm just saying, it probably is. And it's about to be kitten season, so if you don't get this cat, there's going to be a lot of cats.
Yeah,
Like a lot. Like a lot
Yes.
of cats.
yeah, exactly. That's a
Um,
thought too. There's gonna be a bunch.
All right, let's jump back into it so that we
All right.
get to continue our thing here. All right. Mina says, "Let's do a podcast."
Hello. Yeah. I guess just double check the.
Also, Discord, my Discord at least, hates to recognize changes you make on the same session, and usually I have to reboot it. Not my computer, but restart Discord entirely to make
Mhm.
changes stick.
Discord.
Hey, Kato,
Huh? What's up?
what is the thing here? Let me show you.
Hmm.
What's this guy? The thing, the little guy that my microphone is sitting in. What's that guy called?
You know,
Little guy. We call him a little guy. That's the technical term.
It's
is
like
little.
a vase.
It's
a
like
vase.
But for a mic.
But for it's the mic vase.
I don't know if it has an official name.
Can't hear Gita at all. Is
No.
that
Yeah,
known?
we're working on it.
Okay.
What's the little basket that's got the little mic and the suspension with
That's
the hair ties?
called a shock mount.
Shock mount. Cool. I need a
Cool
new
name.
one of those.
Yeah.
Oh.
Oh no.
Well, the hair ties have lost all their
Right.
tautness.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I've been, for the last year and a half, I've been fixing this with ever more elaborate cat's cradle twists to the hair ties to reintroduce tension.
Which really only pulls them further apart in the long run.
Right.
Oh
Right.
wow.
Oh no, Gita.
I have no mouth.
Oh, not after all this.
I have a mouth, but I have no mouth, but I must
no,
scream.
yeah.
I have no mouth.
Well, Gita has
Is
a mouth,
it-
but cannot.
Is
scream.
it working in the settings? Like if you go into settings and voice and video, and then you do let's check, does that? Is it not even seeing it there at all?
Weird.
Not muted on our end. That's
Mm-hmm.
it's the right mic selected, presumably also.
Oh no, Gita's yelling.
I also hate technology.
It's the worst.
What if? Okay.
Nothing. No, we don't hear. There is not a thing. It's not like.
It's not like the.
It's not like
Other
it's
mics.
it's muffled. No, it's nothing. I thought that was going to be a big bottle of
Gita hears
tequila.
us.
I thought that
This
was
is the thing.
tequila.
Gita hears us, right?
It's not tequila. It's water. Yeah. I was like, damn, that tech is bad. Are you? Can you still? Well, it's not at the keyboard, so it doesn't matter.
Gita's working the problem.
It's a good poster. It's a good fuck you pay me poster.
Love it.
Just wondering if it works over here.
Yeah.
Hi. Yeah.
Just also got to plug in my speakers. Oh, they're plugged in. Okay, never mind. They're just really quiet. Yeah? Okay.
What was the solution?
I went to my PC. So,
well.
Cool. So the solution I had to not make my cat angry is completely a failure because I have to podcast over here now. Yeah. Well, she's outside. I opened the window for her. She should live.
Can you still do headphones? Because I hear myself through your speakers.
Yeah. I just need to grab them from my bed.
Yeah, no worries.
Yeah. Boop, boop, boop. Every time I unplug them, I feel stupid now. I was playing Apex, and then I just needed to keep plugging them back in. Oh my god, I need to get the battle pass. Where's the thing? Oh, it's just on the ground. Cool. I'm sorry that I'm always the one having severe technological issues.
It's okay.
No, that's just Waypoint. That's been years of Waypoint.
Always, all the time.
Hello?
Yeah.
Hello.
Okay.
All right, we
Weird.
got you.
I will not question this, but okay. Audacity recording.
What mic were you on
Open.
before?
I was on this mic.
What?
This mic.
Okay.
Taking allergy pills. I won't sniffle as much.
Always good.
Yeah. I'm chipper, and I haven't seen you guys in a minute, so I'm excited to podcast.
Can we go to time.is?
Already there, baby.
Hell yeah.
Can I go to time that? I can. Okay.
I hope so.
Oh, my clock is almost 30 seconds behind.
Wow.
All right, that's the most significant change.
That's a lot.
Yeah.
All right. 5 seconds? 5 after?
It's not a day. Yeah.
I really needed that build up for some reason. I don't know why.
The
One of those
anticipation
days.
felt
Close
good.
the
I
door
needed
real quick.
to, yeah. This is going up tonight, right? Kind of?
Yeah.
Okay.
Same day turnaround. Same like Monday.
Yep.
Yep.